Turkey's president has slapped down demands from major Arab states that he withdraw Turkish troops from Qatar as part of a wider boycott of the tiny Gulf state. The four Arab nations have sent a list of 13 demands to force changes in Qatar's foreign policy, arguing it supports terrorism. But Qatar rejects the demands, as Anne Barker reports.
If the Arab states get their way, Qatar would have until next week to agree to their demands if it wants them to lift a range of economic sanctions imposed earlier this month. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates issued an ultimatum on Friday with 13 separate demands, including that Qatar curb ties with Iran, close the Al Jazeera television channel and expel Turkish forces based in the country. They've accused Qatar of supporting terrorism, but now Turkey's president Recep Tayyip Erdogan has backed Qatar against the Arab states, claiming the demands are disrespectful both to Turkey and Qatar. We consider the demands contravene international law, he says, because there can't be such an attack on the rights of sovereignty in laws between states. I find their involvement in Turkey's agreement with Qatar a very ugly attitude. Qatar's ambassador to Australia, Nasser Khalifa, says the demands placed on his nation are unreasonable, and he's rejected outright claims that Qatar has any military relationship with Iran.
All these accusations built on fabrication. There is no Iranian military personnel in Qatar. There is no military cooperation with Iran. The Americans have the biggest base in Qatar. You think they will accept Iranian to be next to them? I think, this shows you that all their accusation is built on fabrication.
Bob Bowker is a former Australian ambassador in the Middle East and now an adjunct professor at the Centre for Arab and Islamic Studies at the ANU in Canberra. He says there's no prospect that Qatar would agree to the list of demands.
Clearly they're unrealistic and the Qataris quite naturally have rejected them. On the other hand, there has to be a starting point somewhere, and at least having put forward those demands, there is now a basis on which the Kuwaitis and perhaps the Americans can begin to work with both sides to come up with a more realistic formulation.
So do these Arab nations have valid complaints against Qatar? Is this about terrorism, as they claim, or is it more about isolating Iran, one of its allies?
I think there's reason for grievance on the part of the Arab states about the behaviour, particularly of the Arabic service of Al Jazeera. The demands in regard to Iran are less realistic because not only does Qatar have a major economic interest in its relationship with Iran, but it's also true of Oman and Kuwait that they have significant interests with Iran as well. And no Arab state in those circumstances could be expected to cut off ties and expel representation and so on.
Is there evidence, in fact, that Qatar is in fact sponsoring terrorism, as these other nations claim?
Oh yes, the Qataris have been involved with jihadist groups in Syria since almost the beginning of the Syrian uprising. But there have also been groups that have been supported by other Arab states, especially the Saudis, in that regard as well. And the Qataris can point to the fact that they have actually served to broker deals occasionally that have reduced the level of the conflict in Syria, hostage swaps, the evacuation of towns and so on under siege. And they would argue that the role of Qatar in some respects has been to open up opportunities for parties to negotiate and so on.
The US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson agrees that some of the demands imposed on Qatar would be hard to meet, but he's urged all parties to take them as a starting point for countries to sit down and negotiate.
Anne Barker reporting.